Today we're diving into the most commonly asked questions we receive about child custody and basically parenting, separation, divorce or de facto separation. Welcome, Mum.
Hello, Laura. Hello, everyone.
Now, today's episode may be slightly triggering or distressing to anybody going through a current custody case, and there may be discussions of domestic or family violence as well. So please be aware of that and call 1-800-RESPECT if you're family violence, 000 if you're in immediate danger, and also consider calling 1311 for Lifeline for some mental health support.
Hello, I'm Laura Furiosi, divorced mother of 3, and I'm here with my mother, Lynette Galvin, with 35 years experience in family law. You're listening to the Divorce Course podcast. Through our candid discussions, we hope to help you through your divorce or de facto separation. We will be answering the most commonly asked questions and covering the stages and steps that you will face on your way to freedom.
Before we start asking these questions, can I get you to summarize like a basic understanding of what is child custody and what are the different types?
Okay, so child custody is a common term that we used to use in Australia and most other jurisdictions do use. What it means is with whom the children shall live and who gets to make the decision-making, the right to make decision-making about the kids. So it really covers between parental responsibility and where they live. That's kind of custody in a nutshell. And it means all the things about a child.
So there's two parts to it. It's where they're sleeping at night and where they're and who's making the decisions.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And maybe not even sleeping with at night. It may be that there's daytime, spend time with rather than lives with.
Okay. So can I ask as well, just so everyone gets an understanding, say someone who's listening to this today that they haven't left their partner yet or they've just separated, and is there some sort of baseline immediate thing that comes into effect when you separate? Is there some law or something that you have to follow immediately once you've left your ex when it comes to children?
Okay. No, not in Australia.
Okay. When does it get decided?
Well, some people never go to court to get a decision made, and so they continue on as though they were still a couple with children living at home. And generally that means that this is in terms of parental responsibility. And generally that means that each parent has the same rights and responsibilities and obligations towards their children as they had when they were still married or still a couple.
Right.
The difference is usually that the children have to spend time with each parent individually. And that's where some mechanisms have to come into play. Some people work it out and some people need the help of mediators, or ultimately the court will decide.
So we have done a great episode on consent orders versus parenting plans, because there is a informal way of documenting what's going on in a parenting plan that's not using a lawyer. You guys just writing down what you've decided to do. Then there's that next step of making it formal, creating consent orders or going to court and getting orders.
That's right.
So those are the different types. And like you said, Mum, there's also a whole bunch of families out there that have got neither a parenting plan, consent orders, nor court orders, and they just do what they need to do when they decide what they need to do.
So I think that what you've said there is quite neatly putting it in 3 categories. There are people who get nothing and just work it out and everything's hunky-dory, maybe a few hiccups on the line, but nobody gets thingy about it. Parenting plan to people who feel they need it written down, but they're going okay and they don't need it to be enforceable. And then there are orders of the court, either by consent or made after a trial, which is where you have to resort to a stranger making decisions for you at a trial, or you've got an agreement, but you think you need it to have some teeth. It needs to be able to be enforced, so you'll put it in a consent order.
So before we even get to these 10 common questions, my next question is, what if you have a high conflict or manipulative controlling and you don't agree?
Well, it ends up in a bit of a tug of war, doesn't it, with the kids? Because the one thing for sure is they've got to sleep somewhere every night, okay? So if you don't agree on those nights, someone is going to be having a night the other person doesn't agree with, and the person who doesn't agree is going to be champing at the bit. So if you've got a situation like that, you probably have to go to mediation, try really hard to settle it, but you may end up having to go to court.
Right. And see a lawyer, because
Yes.
Mum isn't your lawyer. We are not here to provide legal advice. We're just having a discussion about these most common questions. So let's get into the 10 most commonly asked questions.
Okay, I'm ready. Hang on a minute. I'm ready.
And this first question, we've already done a whole episode on because it's so massive. So you're going to have to give this in a nutshell, Mum, and apologies in advance. But what do the courts consider when trying to figure out who gets custody if you both don't agree on who gets what?
Well, I can answer that quickly.
Oh, great.
The best interests of the child or the best interests of the children.
Right.
That's it.
Okay. The best interests of the children. And there is a definition of what the best interests of the children are in the Family Law Act?
No, not a definition. There's a list of things that the court can take into account when reaching a conclusion as to what is in the children's best interest.
Right. You want to give me a little rundown of that off the
No,
top of your head?
I'm not telling you anything. Yes, so look, they're looking at whether there's been any family violence. They're looking at what's happened in the past with the children, who was perhaps the primary carer before separation, what's been happening since separation, what is the sort of limp along arrangement you've managed to get before you get to court, because the kids have to sleep somewhere, right? They look at your behaviour during, before court, but it really is the best interest of the children. If the kids are old enough, the wishes of the children, and they've got to have a kind of certain maturity, but there's no number in the Family Law Act. So it's depending on their emotional maturity and the extent to which they may have been swayed by an unscrupulous parent or coached. And then really it's competing proposals. They're looking at what say the mother is proposing for the children going forward, including what time they're spending with the father, and they're looking at the proposal the father is putting forward for the children. And it is actually a positive inquiry. It's not, you shouldn't go in bashing each other down. The court has to make a positive inquiry and make a positive decision about what is in the best interests of the children.
I find that really hard to swallow, what you just said there about the positive inquiry, because we get so many people writing in who say, I feel like I am getting my parenting judged, the ex is writing all this crap at me. So I know that the court is trying to do a positive inquiry, but I wish they'd get their head around the fact that people who end up in court are usually there because someone's either not telling the truth or someone's a big pain in the butt. And it's the least positive experience.
Yes. And of course, the stats that have come out say that 83% of cases have some element of family violence in them. And I think the Family Court of Australia the FCFCOA is working very hard to notice what coercive control looks like in a parenting application. And I think the positive inquiry and the competing proposals, that was how it was from 1976 till 2006 when they changed the law to the family law that a lot of our listeners have experienced, which is where there's a presumption of equal shared care. And if that presumption's not rebutted, then the court must consider substantial and a reasonable time and even equal time. So that regime that ran from 2006 to 2024 was a horrible era for people going through it. And the children became pawns, and there was big arguments about what was meant. What is it meant to be 50-50? What about my rights? What about his rights? What about, and no one mentioned the child. So this has knocked that amendment down, those changes away, and we are back to how it used to be. So I can confidently say that's what the court will be doing. They'll go back to those cases and apply that positive inquiry. But with the bonus that they are now being trained to identify what coercive control looks like in court proceedings, Whereas before, like you said, Laura, the other person would throw up all this muck, challenge their parenting, actually impact on a person's ability to parent. And I know our listeners are getting that. But stand tall, because I know that the court understands that it's the best interest of the children, even if some of my colleagues don't quite.
Mum, we're not a political podcast, but I just wanted to know, who was the person that brought in those changes? What was the name of the politician that led that? I just want you to say it.
It was Peter Dutton.
Oh, Peter Dutton. He sounds familiar. Anyway, so just be aware, everyone, that these are the new changes that are coming in that change this horrible, as Mum called it, horrible situation that people have been. Be mindful of that moving forwards. But Mum, the next commonly asked question.
Okay.
How can I increase my chances of getting full custody of my child? Question scares me a little bit because I think it can come from two places. It can come from a place of, my goodness, my child wants protection. We've been through extreme family violence, coercive control. What can I do to make sure that my child is safe? But it can also come from the other extreme. We've also seen in messages, TikToks and emails where, what can I do to build strongest case to punish the other person so they're never child again? So I know you don't want to answer this question, but
you are so right. I do not want to answer it.
But can you explain anything around it? We have talked about what the court looks at.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, we have talked about that, and the court looks at those competing scenarios. If you are someone who thinks you need to protect your child, then you need to bring to the court all of the reasons why the other person is unsafe. And it generally will be around family violence. If it's just that the other person hasn't been a particularly good parent, but they've been around, that won't disentitle them, or won't mean that the children get deprived of the right to see that other parent. There's a concept of, which gave me great comfort when I was raising you and all your siblings, of the good enough parent, because we all have days, right? And so a good enough parent still has a role to play in a child's life. So what we're talking about, I suggest or expect from the person who wants to protect the child, is that you feel that the benefits to the child of having time with the other parent is far outweighed by the risk to the child of having time with the other parent. Now, hopping over to the other scenario where someone just wants to get the children for some non-child focused reason, I'm not going to tell anyone that.
Good. I actually found a shop explaining that to people, and I was shocked that it was in all. I took it and had a read of it, and the whole thing's terrifying. And I did say to Mum, maybe we could do an episode about it, but just even looking at it makes me feel sick. So it is important for people to know, if you're listening to this and you're right at the beginning, you may feel that everything's going to be hunky-dory, but there are a lot of people out there that get a shock when all of a sudden the other side in their separate journey is making stuff up and trying to get 100% custody. So you need to act protectively and smartly the whole way through this.
Yes, but can I say that I have seen a big increase when I'm talking to people, and you know it too, Laura, from someone in our group, where they go to court with their story and the judges are noticing coercive control and are making orders to protect the children. So I know I am a Pollyanna kind of happy person or positive person, but I see the training that's going on behind the scenes with lawyers and judges, and I think their comeuppance has come. But those people who read that book, who wrote that book, all of those groups who are trying to artificially manufacture a circumstance that makes, when they go to court, works in their favour. And you know why I reckon it won't work anymore? It's because coercive control is not something people usually stop when they separate, right? And so there will be evidence of coercive control, even in going to the court and asking for 100% time with the child when that hasn't been a role, when previously the other person was doing most of the work with the kids. The court's going to go, why did you bring that application? I'm sus about that.
Yeah. Okay, this one is number 3. What is the difference between legal custody and physical custody?
That's interesting. That's number 3. So because I have to get my head around that, because I guess if you heard that saying, possession's 9/10 of the law, I guess if someone's grabbed a child and they shouldn't have them with them, that might be physical custody. Or if they've separated and the child is with them anyway, that's physical custody. But because there've been no orders about a person having sole custody of the child, you are both in the same boat as you were when you separated. That is, each of you can make the orders. But if you've got physical custody, that's where the child is that night. And I guess a lot of people do that, you know.
Right, Mum,
and there are those awful child snatchers.
do not snatch children. It does not go well for you in the end. There's jail time. There's all sorts of things that will happen to people who snatch children.
Yeah, and you'll be lucky to see them again, to be honest, until they're 18. So I've seen some terrible things in my career, and it's almost never a good idea unless there's really serious danger. And by golly, you'd better be ready to explain that to the court.
I do hate that's number 3 in the most questions. Okay.
Well, it just means we have to work harder in our education, because it might be that if the kids are living with somebody and they don't have anything in writing, no parenting plan, no orders, maybe that's what they mean about physical custody. It might not be in a snatching scenario. Yeah. It just might be, well, it is what it is. It's what those people have who don't have any orders or anything. And each person, when they've got the kids, they've got physical custody.
So I have heard of scenarios where people have been, basically their ex disappears and they go away for 3 years. They're gone. And they're left scrambling. They have to pick up the pieces. They've got to look after their children. We got an email just recently, and it was horrifying and heartbreaking for everybody in that family to pick up the pieces and restart their lives. And then you've heard of other stories where 3 years later they come back and they demand, or 10 years later, I even heard one 10 years later they come back demanding 50-50 custody. So, Mum, can you just, to anybody who's going through that situation, can you give them a bit of insight?
Well, anyone who thinks they can just vanish and then come back and look for 50-50 custody is completely deluded. And if they go and see a lawyer, that lawyer should tell them in no uncertain terms that's not achievable, okay? And the court punishes lawyers who don't tell their clients about the law, the cost consequences, about the damage to children caused by subsequent litigation. I think that scenario, the kids have healed probably to some extent, and then it just depends if it's, what is it about this person? Why did they vanish, and how do we know they won't do it again? So why would you set up an arrangement with the kids on the basis that they're better now and they're going to be there for the rest of their lives?
Yeah.
It's tricky.
It's hard. And we're thinking of anybody going through that right now, either at the beginning of that or at the end of that. Next question, number 4, horrible, and this is a trigger warning. Please call 1-800-RESPECT or 13 11 14 if you're feeling unsettled by family violence. But can my ex get custody if they have a history of domestic violence? And that's a huge loaded question.
Yeah, but usually not.
Really?
Usually not. Yes, usually not. Even under the Mr. Dutton's amendments or to the Family Law Act in 2006, family violence was one of the primary concerns. They had to keep the kids safe from family violence. If there's been family violence and you haven't been the one who's been violent, then chances are the kids will stay with you and the other person will have to see them in a safe way, maybe supervised, maybe mostly video link, something like that.
Can I ask the question, do they have to be convicted of domestic violence for that to be guaranteed? Or because there's a lot of people out there who they write to us and they say, my ex, there's domestic violence, but the court said, oh, that was in the past.
Yes. It doesn't have to be proven. And in fact, if you've got a family violence order from a magistrate's court or a county court, if you're in Victoria, and you take that to the family court or Federal Circuit and Family Court, you have to show it to them. You have to attach it to your notice of risk. But the extent to which the court, the higher court, because it's a Commonwealth court, the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia, they can take notice of it, but they aren't really bound by it. So there was this awful thing called unacceptable risk, okay, for a long time. And this was even before the 2006 amendments. And I hated it. I struggled to get my head around it because the court had to make a finding, it was thought, that a person had done something, okay, and that before they could say they were an unacceptable risk. And then if they weren't an unacceptable risk and the bar was quite high, then they'd look at how the risk could be managed and make awards for children to spend time with that a parent who had been a violent or who is a risk. Recently, though, the court has looked at it. I think it's Nelson, where the court said, hey, stop. Yes, it's a high standard of proof. You'll hear things like the Brigham-Shaw test, which is like on the balance of probabilities, but a little bit higher, where the court would have to make a finding that a person had been violent to a child. And what the court would do before this Nelson case, the court would say, well, we can't find that on that very high civil standard, therefore the time has to happen. Now, the Nelson, the court said, no, that's two separate tests. One test to see if there was violence, and the court may not be able to make a finding about that. But the other thing is to the best interests of the child, and that is not dependent on making a finding about violence. So the upshot of that is that I think we've got clarity going forward, especially with the enhanced definition of family violence with the coercive control. I think that the court, because that was full court decision. So now I think the judges will be going, I don't have to make a finding on a very high standard that there was unacceptable risk. I don't have to have a family court order or a magistrate's court order about the violence. All I have to do is take notice of that and then decide if there's an unacceptable risk to the child. And what they said in that case was that unacceptable risk, if it was on the balance of probabilities, and this trigger warning really, this is an awful example, but it's the one the court used. If you have a child going into the care of three carers, and one of those carers is likely to abuse the child, the other two aren't going to. So on the balance of probabilities test that people had to play, they'd say you'd send the child to those carers because they've only got a 1 in 3 chance of getting assaulted. And you would actually have to wait until 2 of them were likely to abuse before you could stop sending the child. And the court clearly said, that's rubbish. That's nonsense. And I was so happy with that. And so now I think that it is easier for the court to make a finding of unacceptable risk. Those coercive control behaviours that ran rampant all the way through between 2006 and 2024 are now going to be discovered.
And I think, Mum, I've heard you use that explanation of if someone said to you, oh, this surgeon may do surgery on your foot, you've got a 90% chance they'll do surgery on your foot, but there's like a 20% chance or 10% do surgery on your heart. Would you go in?
Yeah. And, I thought of that when I was before a judge who made a finding that there was certainly risk, but it was a risk that could be mitigated. And they did that. And whenever I said that story, I pictured them lying on a gurney about to go into the operating room. And just as they give you the relax injection, they give you, look, by the way, this guy is probably 10% likely to take the wrong foot off. But don't worry about it. It's not an unacceptable risk.
It's not even funny, but it's horrible. All right, so let's go on to the next question. I don't know if we're going to get through 10, so I'm going to jump. And if we have time, we'll go back to the other one. Can my child decide who they want to live with?
You're invited to our free webinar. Whether you're stuck at the beginning of deciding to divorce or you're struggling to find your way through the legal jargon and fear of the unknown of the legal process, we are here to empower you to take control. Join us to learn what steps you can take, followed by a live Q&A where you get Lynn, my amazing mum, and family law accredited specialist to answer your question. All you have to do is go to www.thedivorcecourse.com.au and click on Reserve My Seat. We'll see you there. Hurry, spaces are limited, so don't miss out. Register today.
Can my child decide who they want to live with?
Yes, at some stage, depending on their age and maturity. It used to be 14. They took that out of the Act. But generally speaking, legal education only. And just from my experience, once a child's about 13 or 14, and they have strong views, they will be listened to.
Right. Okay.
And that's because they can vote with their feet. It's interesting that that's a question.
Mm.
Mm.
It's number 7.
Yeah.
So people must Google that a lot. All right.
Yeah.
Number 8. What happens if one parent wants to relocate with the child?
Oh, that's just opened a whole can of worms.
Now, before you start, we have done a really good episode on domestic and international travel. It was a while ago, but it is a good one. But, Mum, let's open this can of worms in a short amount of time. What happens if one parent wants to
I can take a hint, Laura. I'll trim it down. No ranting, promise. The court will look at the advantages and disadvantages to the child of the relocation. They can never stop a parent moving, but they can stop the child from going. So they are probably, usually if someone wants to stop a parent from moving with the child, that person who wants to stop the other parent moving needs to have a proposal that involves the child staying with them and them letting the child or having the child see the other parent. So the court will look at their relationships and see what's in the best interest. But you shouldn't assume just because the kids live with you most of the time that they will be going with you. That's not the case. The court will look at the disruption to their relationship with the other parent.
So should they go to court to ask permission to move?
Oh, yes. You shouldn't move first. The court, to use one of my phrases, takes a very dim view of people who do that. And it looks like you don't value the other parent's role in the child's life and that you've prioritised yourself. So it's a tricky way to walk.
Can I just pop this question in here as well because it's similar?
Is this 7A? Question 7A.
Well, actually, 8. I've really done this wrong. 8. What happens if your ex is threatening to take your child overseas?
Oh, you can, if it's serious, if you really think they might, then you can go to the Australian Federal Police website and look at the ways of putting on a PACE alert. If you can get that alert on, then when their passports are scanned or looked at immigration, the federal police will be called. They will stop the child from going to wherever it is they're wanting to go, but they will let the other parent leave.
Right.
And
okay.
It's a pretty extreme thing, but it's comforting.
Yeah. Question 9. How does joint custody work and what are the pros and cons?
Yes. So normal, kind, loving parents, both of them, if they're both normal, kind, loving parents, usually just muddle it through. It'll be like, oh, she's got to go to the dentist on Wednesday. That's the night I have my meeting. Are you able to take it? Yeah, I'll take her. And where they communicate nicely. And I think joint custody, even if it's been a bit rough in the relationship, there's been a bit of fighting, some people settle into what I would call a more mature parenting relationship. And I never see those people as lawyers. We don't see them.
I see them on TikTok. And I don't know if it's fake or real, but I do see some families where they say it takes a couple of years to settle down and then it just becomes they go over to their place for birthday parties. Their grandparents still are all involved. Everyone still just works as a village to raise the child. Isn't that wonderful?
I know. You look at Bruce Willis and Demi Moore and his current wife, the whole family, they live together to help him through all this. We've had relatives for Christmas who are from my ex.
But that's not the way the cookie crumbles. And I think if you have a high conflict or a manipulative controlling ex, that doesn't make you a bad person.
No.
And joint custody then can look a little bit more bumpy and crazy. But there are some great strategies. We've got some great episodes on co-parenting with a manipulative controlling person. Yeah. We talk about how you can use that platforms like Our Children or My Family Wizard to communicate, just to keep a little bit of respectable distance. There, the Darbo tactics, also the Grey Rock method. We've got some great episodes on dealing with narcissists. And sadly, there are some people who have to go through that.
Yeah. You know that TikTok thing? I can't imagine why anyone would want to put that on TikTok for the children's sakes. You know what I mean? It's making a virtue out of it, which is fine, but is it meant to make everyone else feel pretty bad? And it's not your fault if your ex is terrible.
Exactly. The last question, 10. How can I prove my ex is unfit for custody? Dun, dun, dun.
You know, you never hear the phrase unfit father, but you always hear people go, she's an unfit mother. And actually, I don't know who says that in that tone of voice, but that's been a saying around since the 1930s under the Matrimonial Causes Act. Look, it's that you've got to show the court that you've got the best interests of the children at heart. And if there is a reason why the children can't go to the other parent, then you set those out exactly why. Don't draw the conclusion. Don't go, how can I show this? There are behaviours. Put it in as an example. Put it in your affidavit and let the court look at that and say, well, is that good enough parenting? Or is it's just not in the child's best interests? So I'm not going to help that person either. Look at the Act. Look at Section 60cc.
Yeah. Now look,
of the Family Law Act.
The two other questions, which I don't think will be relevant to anyone listening to this episode because these people are all at the beginning or going through it, but they were, how can I modify an existing custody arrangement? Can you just answer that really quickly?
Yes, you can go back to court, but be careful in Australia because unless something dramatic has changed, it could get kicked out of court and you might not. You might end up with costs. Another way is by consent, or because most orders in Australia will say the children spend time with the parent at all times as agreed between the parties, but failing agreement, and then it sets it out. So if you've agreed differently, go.
Okay. And lastly, what should I do if my ex is not following the custody arrangements?
If they're not letting you have the children when you're supposed to, that would definitely mean you need to go either urgently to court or back to mediation and maybe bring it to the attention of the court. It may be a contravention. If they are not taking the children when they're supposed to, pursuant to the orders, unfortunately, there's nothing you can do because the court doesn't think it's in the best interests of the children to foist them on someone who doesn't want them.
Yeah. And we did a good episode called Help, My Ex Isn't Letting Me See the Kids. It's a super early one, but it may be helpful to anyone who's experiencing that currently. Now, those questions are a little eye-opening for us in a way because, that's interesting to see they're the ones that most people ask. But the thing that I've realised, especially talking to our members every week, is no one really knows. No one has a clue when you separate what the rules are, what the lay of the land is. And a lot of people I've found get tricked by their ex who say, you must do this. You're breaking the law if you don't do this, or pressuring them in different ways. And it's a real push at the beginning in the early stages to get their plans, their idea, if they're manipulative and controlling, across the line. So please educate yourself. Go and listen to some other episodes that we've done in the past so that you are aware of what's going on, and see a lawyer. Emma, if it's manipulative and controlling, is there anything you want to say for anyone going through custody issues?
I think manipulation and control is now defined as a form of family violence, coercion. If someone's saying to you that you've got to do this and it's the law and so forth, they are trying to bully you. And I suggest you ring 1-800-RESPECT and get some help that way. So yes, so manipulative and controlling, be careful of their little games and don't go to mediation too soon. Don't agree to family therapy or any of the things that would just give them another opportunity to have a go at you.
Yeah. Okay. High conflict? Any tips for high conflict?
Try not to provoke them any more than you have to. Be very measured in what you write. And if you are sending them an email, don't put too many facts in that they can argue with. Don't look backwards. So you just say, how about this? And put your points as small as you can so they have to answer to the point. And if they don't answer to the point, listen to the word salad episode we did where you can sort out all of the blaming. And I think it's good for people to be prepared with this because sometimes the person you thought you knew has disappeared and been replaced by this awful human.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that can happen a lot later too, if they get a new partner maybe, or, all of a sudden the dynamics change. So be mindful of that. You can download our free word salad checklist off the divorcecourse.com.au. You can go up the top kind of left-hand side in the free resources drop down and you can download that word salad checklist, which will help you read things a little bit better. I think it's also important to note for high conflict, to be really mindful of the kids, that they're not getting involved in it, or they're not being told, they said this and now they've done this, or they overhear you fighting. We've got a great episode called Help My Exes Trash Talking to the Kids. Mum talks about how to deal with that. So I think that's really important to note.
Do you know, we sort of tripped over to amicable, didn't we, Laura, about how people might be amicable and then they repartner or something happens or you repartner and then it all goes to pot. And for amicable people, we always say, don't we, get it down in writing early. A parenting plan, if you think you need orders, maybe a consent order in case you have to enforce it later on.
Yeah. And even though a parenting plan, and we talk about this in that consent order or parenting plan episode, even though it's not legal, the court will look at it and go, this is what's been going on. Why all of a sudden do you want to change it? So, And it's not just what's been going on, it's what you both agreed should go on in the past. And so it's valuable as evidence of that. Now, the other one is avoidant. So what kind of drama do you see avoidant people dealing with avoidant exes during custody issues?
Yeah, well, if it's a real really bad case of avoidance, there may be elements of depression. And they may not be able to face things. So they become very unreliable as a co-parent. They might not want to take the kids to basketball because the other parents are there. They might not take the child to the doctor when they're supposed to. Or when the child gets sick, they bring them back to you. Or they just won't discuss stuff, So it's tricky with an avoidant person. It's all right if they're avoidant and they don't have the children all the time or don't have them much, then you'll just have to work around it. But if they're avoidant and having the children on a regular basis, one of the things you can do when you send an email or a message, put a clue to what it is in the heading so that they can summon the courage to open up the email. Just try it.
Can I also do things like, if I don't hear from you by next week, I'm going to assume you agree to doing X, Y, Z?
Yes, only perhaps not so forcefully. So you might say, look, we've been told to take Mary to the orthodontist. I'm thinking I can do that. Here are a couple of orthodontists. Have you got any preference? If I don't hear from you, I'll make a booking on the 10th and I'll just choose the first one or the first available date. And that it's gentle, it's chatty, but it means that you're not stuck waiting for an avoidant person to get unavoidant and give you an answer. Yeah, so it's it's very subtle. You don't want to drive them deeper into their shell.
Yeah. Wow. So, look, this was a bit of a rough run over some different custody issues. We have a lot of custody episodes that you can go listen to. We plan on doing some more in-depth ones moving forwards.
Yes.
So if you've got a topic on custody that you would like us to cover, please email us at divorcecourspodcast@gmail.com. We also have the Help My Exes Using Children as Chess Pieces episode where Mum helps you negotiate that situation and gives you some tips. But of course, go and see a lawyer, make sure you know where you stand, and we'll be here with you as you go through it. But I hope whatever you're facing right now, when it comes to custody, can feel, it does feel, it is the biggest, most important thing in your life because your children are the most important thing in your life. So we know the feelings that come along with that.
We do.
And we want to make sure that you know that you're supported, but also that you should go and get mental health support as well. See a psychologist, take care of yourself, and make sure that you're the best you can be to get through this for yourself and your children.
Seeing a psychologist is not a sign of weakness, and the court doesn't regard it as such. They regard it as a sensible approach to keep you on an even keel going forward. And in June of this year, 2025, the Protected Confidences legislation will become law, and then your notes from your psychologist or psychiatrist, if they're subpoenaed, may not be allowed to be looked at by anybody because it's for your therapeutic purposes, because that was a way that a lot of manipulative and controlling people would do to get to hurt a person, and people wouldn't go to the psychologist. And I even had one case where even though children's orders were finished, the person subpoenaed that poor lady's records after the case was over. So it's not a bad thing to get your therapy. You do need it. And it's just like keeping your car topped up with oil during this rough patch.
But the key point is their mum said it may not be allowed to be subpoenaed. So just keep that in mind as well. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you again, everybody. Take care and we'll see you again next week. And thank you, Mum, for your time.
No worries, Laura. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
If you found this podcast helpful, we'd love it if you could rate, review and subscribe. By doing so, you are spreading the word to help someone else just like you. Lynn would like to remind you that this podcast is general advice only and you should always get legal advice in relation to your particular situation. And remember that the Australian laws may have changed since recording.